Welcome to another episode of Game Boy Roulette, where we take a look at randomly chosen games from the Game Boy library. Corrections. Ooh, special episode. While I don't consider myself an expert on the Game Boy, I at least like to think that I do my research and try to give the most accurate information possible. But in 118 episodes, there are definitely some mistakes I've made, so I thought it might be fun to give the randomizer the week off and instead go back and correct some of the mistakes that have come up in previous episodes of Game Boy Roulette, whether they be new information I just found out that sheds more light on the game, or in some cases just outright misinformation. So without further ado, let's get correcting. Out of Gas was a surprisingly fun arcadey-style overhead action game with fun graphics, animated cutscenes, and gameplay that consisted of finding keys to escape the level. But since the episode, I learned something interesting. In some ways, the game is kind of a port. See, Real Time Associates also developed a game for the NES called Funhouse, based on the beloved game show. And check out the gameplay. Looks pretty familiar, huh? It appears Real Time Associates used the engine, reskinned it as a space game, and brought it to the Game Boy. Still though, it means that not only was Out of Gas a fun game, it was a well-done port. Damn it, now I really miss Funhouse. That show was the best. When I looked back at this game in 2017, I mentioned that I couldn't find any information about it. Not even Game FAQs had anything, which is insane. Well, since then, I've gotten some answers. This strange racing game is an arcade port. It was originally released in 1979 under the name Head On, which had ports to both the Commodore 64 and the VIC-20. But most interestingly, the game was made by Sega. Yeah, that Sega, or at least one of their subsidiaries, Gremlin Industries, and over a decade later it was brought to the Game Boy with all references to Sega removed. Presumably, Sega is currently working on a 3D conversion that'll be critically panned. Was that too easy? That joke seemed a little too easy. The crossover that I'm sure some people were excited for was a relatively fun action platformer. However, during my review, I mentioned that the thing that hurt the most was that their attempt to recreate Robocop's movement sound resulted in a terrible, annoying tone in the background. Well, it turns out that wasn't present in the original game. See, I don't own a lot of these games, so for ease of recording, I use an emulator to play them, and the ROM I had for Robocop vs. Terminator was bugged, causing that sound. Standard cartridges work totally fine. So, yeah, critical research failure on my part. I hereby revise my Robocop vs. Terminator review from good but turn off the sound to just plain good. Hey, it's an upgrade. Harvest Moon's second game to hit the Game Boy was a delightful little farming experience. I mentioned several times throughout the video that Natsume was the developer behind it, as they were the ones who always had their name attached. Well, I got my information mixed up. They were the publisher of the game. In fact, they didn't develop any of the Harvest Moon games. Harvest Moon 2 was developed by Victor Interactive Software, who would go on to merge with Marvelous Entertainment. Sorry for the mix-up, Victor. Hope things are going well in Latveria. Just a minor one here. I mentioned in the video that the first baseball game for Game Boy was Roger Clemens' MVP Baseball. Well, that's not true. The first baseball game for Game Boy was the game uniquely titled Baseball. In fact, Baseball was a launch title for the Game Boy, thus proving once and for all that the Game Boy invented baseball. Daedalian Opus was a bizarre but fun puzzle game with a really weird title. For some reason they decided to take Daedalian, the son of Lucifer who turns into a hawk out of grief over his daughter dying, and name the game after him. Or at least they would have if I had any clue what I was talking about. The game isn't named after Daedalian, it's named after Daedalus, ancient Greek craftsman who built the labyrinth. Yeah, go figure, this puzzle game is named after a legendary puzzle figure. This one is the most embarrassing. How the hell did I miss that? I love puzzles, I've gotten Tetris Maximus. How dare I disrespect the king of puzzles? GTA's attempt at a handheld on the Game Boy Color wasn't that great, but was still technologically impressive. But this one ended up having a massive asterisk. As I said, I use an emulator to run these games, and without realizing it, I accidentally recorded this one in its Game Boy Color form instead of its Game Boy version. So I was reviewing the more technologically sound one. So let's really quickly go back and see, how does the game work when it's running on the original Game Boy? Well, it's pretty much the same, but a little bit slower. Music's a total bop, though. I forgot how good the music was in this. Weirdly enough, when you travel diagonally, the game slows down like crazy. Excuse me. Sir, taxi. Sir, I can't move. There we go. Yeah, it's still generally pretty fun. Not amazing, but alright. But like, oh god. The original Game Boy has trouble with concepts like diagonals. Okay, this one is absolutely bizarre. In reviewing Tasmania, as I usually do, I brought up the box art to look at. Well, this isn't the box art for Tasmania. For reasons I will never understand, the first result when you search for the box art is the art instead for Tasmania 2, but edited to have the 2 in the title removed. I know, isn't that weird? This is the real box art for Tasmania, depicting Taz doing his usual twirling destruction. I'm not sure who to blame for this one, so I'll blame a character from the show, as soon as I can remember any of their names. This one is less a correction and more just some interesting information. Bomberman GB was actually the second Bomberman game on the Game Boy. In Japan, it's even known as Bomberman GB2. So what happened to the first one? Well, it did get a release in the US, under the name Wario Blast featuring Bomberman. That's right, somehow Wario muscled his way into a Bomberman game. Man, those hypnosis classes must really be paying off for him. A recent one, but definitely worth mentioning. Everyone knows that Namco were the company behind PacMan, so when I was reviewing Ms. PacMan, I just sort of assumed that they were behind it too. Yeah, it turns out they weren't. In actuality, a company called General Computer Corporation made a PacMan enhancement kit they called Crazy Otto. They sold the game to Midway, who repackaged it into Ms. PacMan. So while Namco did get some royalties from the game, they basically just sat back and stayed hands off. So that's all the corrections I have. Just a nice way to go back and re-examine a few things that I got wrong. Now, one more thing to address. People have asked me what my plan is when I run out of Game Boy games. Granted, that's not going to happen for quite some time, but I thought I might as well make the announcement now. Start looking forward to Game Boy Color Roulette, coming to YouTube in, 2030. And that's all for another episode of Game Boy Roulette. Make sure to subscribe so you can follow the series as we continue to dig through the Game Boy vault. I'm Brian J, and I'll see you next time.